The massive crystal dome of Nexus Prime buzzed with activity as delegates from nearly 1,000 different worlds gathered for what many considered the most entertaining council session in decades. Ambassador Haye Jin stood at the central podium, her blue skin shimmering under the artificial lights as she prepared to address the greatest collection of alien intelligence in the known galaxy. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying through the chamber's translation systems, Present Resolution 2847B for your consideration. The complete quarantine and technological embargo of the species known as humans. The word humans seemed to trigger something in the vast assembly. A ripple of what could only be described as snickering passed through the crowd. The Korthak. Delegation, massive reptilian beings who stood nearly 3 meters tall, let out deep rumbling sounds that their translators rendered as laughter. Even the normally serious ethereal conclave flickered with colors that suggested amusement. Haye Jin continued, reading from her prepared statement with theatrical flair. The evidence clearly shows that this species exhibits dangerous levels of recklessness, unpredictable behavior patterns, and a complete disregard for established galactic protocols. The laughter grew louder. In the Drakmor section, scaled heads bobbed up and down as the reptilian delegates shared what appeared to be inside jokes. The crystalline Silthara beings created a musical tinkling sound that filled their corner of the chamber. Take, for example, the diplomatic missions led by Captain Do-hyun, Haye Jin said, activating a holographic display. When first contact was established with the carnivorous Zephyrian pack hunters, standard protocol dictates maintaining a safe distance and communicating through automated drones. Instead, Captain Do-hyun personally approached the Alpha Predator and attempted to pet it. The chamber erupted. The insectoid Hive Queen's translator was working overtime to convey what seemed to be the collective equivalent of hysterical laughter from her species. Several smaller delegates were actually rolling in their seats. But that's not all. Haye Jin pressed on, clearly enjoying the reaction. When offered the opportunity to establish trade relations with the silicon-based Zerian Collective, Captain Do-hyun's crew presented them with something called kimchi as a gesture of friendship. For those unfamiliar, kimchi is a fermented organic compound that would be completely inedible and potentially toxic to silicon-based life forms. A Queldorian delegate, whose species breathed methane, made a sound like a deflating balloon. There, translator helpfully added, Delegate Kixamol notes the absurdity of offering biological matter to mineral beings. Haye Jin pulled up another file. Commander Jiwoo submitted tactical reports suggesting that human military doctrine includes something called aggressive hugging as a conflict resolution strategy. When questioned about this term, she explained that humans believe physical contact can calm down angry people. The Psychological Analysis Division has dismissed these reports as the confused observations of a species barely 2 centuries into. Space travel. The Vorthan delegate, a being of pure energy contained in a mechanical suit, sparked with what appeared to be electronic laughter. 2 centuries, the translation system announced. My species has been traveling between stars for 50,000 years, and we've never attempted to hug our enemies. And then there's the matter of their naming conventions, Haye Jin continued, now clearly playing to the crowd. The reptilian Drakmor delegation has brought to our attention that humans name their warships things like Eternal Friendship, Diplomatic Solution, and Last Resort. One particular vessel, commanded by a Lieutenant Taemin, is actually called Sorry about this, the Drakmor delegation hissed louder, which their translators interpreted as uncontrollable laughter. One of them managed to speak through the hilarity. Lieutenant Taemin approached our sacred war totems and attempted to perform what he called a handshake with our geometric spiritual forms. Our priests are still trying to determine if this was an insult or a blessing. Haye Jin nodded gravely, though there was a clear twinkle in her eye. Even more concerning are the reports from Admiral Eunjung's peacekeeping missions. She has somehow managed to resolve 3 separate territorial disputes, end 2 trade wars, and establish diplomatic relations with previously hostile species. When asked about her methods, she simply states that she invited everyone for dinner and let them work it out themselves. The chamber fell into a brief, confused silence before the laughter resumed even louder than before. The concept of solving galactic conflicts with shared meals seemed to strike every species as equally absurd. The Psychological Evaluation Committee has classified these successes as statistically impossible lucky accidents, Hyejin announced. No rational species could achieve such results through such chaotic and unprofessional methods. As the laughter died down, Hyejin raised her arms for attention. Distinguished delegates, it should be clear that such unpredictable and chaotic beings pose a significant risk to galactic stability, not through malice but through sheer random incompetence. I call for an immediate vote on Resolution 2847B. The vote seemed like a mere formality at this point. After all, who could argue with such overwhelming evidence of human absurdity? The laughter from Hyejin's presentation had barely died down when delegates began raising their appendages, tentacles and energy fields to share their own experiences with humans. The atmosphere in the chamber shifted from formal proceedings to something resembling a comedy club, as species after species stepped forward with increasingly bizarre tales. The massive hive queen, a creature that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a cathedral, activated her translation matrix first. Her mechanical voice filled the chamber as thousands of smaller insectoid beings buzzed in, what could only be described as collective giggling. The hive recalls the incident with Sergeant Minho's military unit, the translator announced. During a joint training exercise in the Kepler Nebula, combat operations were conducted while the human soldiers engaged in singing. Not communication protocols or battle cries, but actual melodic vocalizations. When questioned about this behavior, Sergeant Minho explained that music helps them stay calm and work together better. The hive's tactical analysis indicates this should have resulted in immediate defeat. Instead, the human unit achieved a 97% success rate. The chamber buzzed with confused amusement. The concept of singing during battle struck most species as either completely insane or somehow brilliant, though none could decide which. From the methane breathing section, a delegate that resembled a walking jellyfish with too many eyes pulsed forward. Engineer Su Jin attempted to repair our atmospheric processes using what she called percussive maintenance, the amphibious being announced through their translation device. When our quantum crystalline circuits failed to respond to standard recalibration procedures, she struck the device with a metal tool while making encouraging vocal sounds. This method, which should have resulted in catastrophic system failure, somehow restored full functionality. The crystalline Silthara beings created a symphony of confused chiming sounds. Their representative finally spoke. We have analyzed this percussive maintenance technique for 3 cycles. Our computational models suggest it should be impossible, yet we have recorded 47 instances of humans successfully repairing advanced technology by hitting it with primitive tools while speaking to the machines as if they were living beings. More delegates began sharing their stories, each one more bewildering than the last. A Drakmor military commander, his scales still gleaming from recent combat, stepped forward with what appeared to be reluctant admiration. Colonel Wu Jin's unit, he began, his voice a deep rumble that shook the smaller delegates in their seats, adopted 3 razor-claw stalkers as unit mascots. These creatures are apex predators, capable of tearing through combat armor with their bare claws. They have killed experienced Drakmor warriors, yet somehow the humans convinced these death machines to wear small fabric accessories and respond to names like Fluffy, Buddy, and Princess. The chamber fell silent for a moment as the implications sank in. Then the laughter resumed, even louder than before. From the research section, a floating brain in a containment suit spoke up. Dr. Yejin's xenobiology team has formed what they call emotional bonds with their AI research systems. They give the artificial intelligences names, celebrate their computational achievements with ceremonial food consumption, and regularly engage in recreational conversations with programs designed for data analysis. The AI systems have begun requesting specific music during their operations and expressing preferences for certain human team members. The ethereal conclave flickered with colors that their translators struggled to interpret. Finally, a voice emerged from their energy, Field, the humans have taught machines to have opinions. This should not be possible. Captain Jae-hyun's crew became the next subject of discussion when a Vortan delegate shared security footage from a space station incident. The human crew celebrated what they called Taco Tuesday by consuming fermented beverages and engaging in synchronized movement patterns they referred to as dancing. This occurred immediately after successfully negotiating a peace treaty between two warring factions. When asked about the connection between diplomatic success and ritualistic alcohol consumption, Captain Jae-hyun stated that good work deserves good celebration. The mockery reached new heights when navigator So Young's flight records were brought up. A Queldorian mathematician whose species prided itself on precision calculations shared data that made no mathematical sense. Navigator So Young has successfully plotted courses through asteroid fields that our computers classify as navigationally impossible, the mathematician announced, his bulbous eyes blinking in confusion. Her flight paths violate 17 different laws of physics and ignore 43 standard safety protocols. Yet her success rate is 100%. When questioned about her methods, she claims she goes with her gut feeling and trusts the ship to know what it wants to do. But perhaps the most bewildering tale came from an automated defense system administrator. Pilot Gun Woo somehow established conversational protocols with our security networks, the delegate reported. He greets our defensive satellites by name each morning, asks about their day, and has convinced them to work together as a team. Our machines now send him status reports that include what can only be described as emotional content. As story after story poured forth, the Council's mood grew increasingly jovial. These humans weren't just unpredictable, they were completely, utterly, magnificently absurd. They treated deadly situations like games, formed friendships with machines, solved complex problems with primitive methods, and somehow made everything work, despite violating every known principle of logic and reason. The general consensus was becoming clear. Such a chaotically unpredictable species needed immediate containment before they accidentally caused some kind of galactic embarrassment through their bizarre methods. The laughter in the chamber gradually died down as Ambassador Hyejin raised her hand for attention. Her expression had shifted from theatrical amusement to something more serious, though most delegates were still wiping away tears of laughter from the previous testimonies. "Honored delegates," she announced, her voice cutting through the lingering chuckles, "I present to you the final piece of evidence that will seal our decision today. Thanks to our intelligence operatives, we have obtained exclusive surveillance footage of human military training exercises." The massive holographic projectors hummed to life, casting a three-dimensional image that filled the center of the chamber. The delegates settled back into their seats, expecting another round of entertaining human incompetence. After all, how dangerous could their military training possibly be? The footage began with a sweeping view of what appeared to be a barren, lifeless moon. The surface was scarred with deep craters, jagged rock formations, and an atmosphere so thin it was practically non-existent. Radiation readings scrolled across the bottom of the display, showing levels that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. "This is Training Ground Zeta 7, Hyejin explained, a moon that our xenobiological surveys classified as completely uninhabitable for all known life forms. The surface temperature fluctuates between -180 and +200 degrees Celsius. Radiation levels exceed safety limits by 400%, and the atmospheric pressure is essentially zero." A few delegates nodded knowingly. Most civilized species used computer simulations for military training, or at worst, mildly challenging environments with full life support systems. Surely the humans were using this footage as some kind of theoretical exercise. Then the camera zoomed in, and figures began moving across the hellish landscape. They were human soldiers, but something was immediately wrong about what the delegates were seeing. The figures moved with a fluid precision that seemed almost choreographed. Sergeant Hansol's unit spread out across the rocky terrain in a formation that looked random at first glance, but revealed itself to be mathematically perfect upon closer inspection. The Korthak military delegate, whose species had conquered 17 star systems through superior tactics, leaned forward in his seat. His reptilian eyes narrowed as he watched the humans navigate obstacles that should have required heavy machinery to overcome. They weren't stumbling around like the bumbling species he'd been laughing about moments earlier. Private Dahun appeared on screen, moving through what the radiation detector clearly marked as a lethal hot zone. She wasn't wearing the bulky environmental suits that most species would require. Instead, she had on what appeared to be standard military gear with some additional protection, but nothing that should have kept her alive in those conditions. "Wait," the Korthek delegate said suddenly, his voice cutting through the murmurs in the chamber. "How are they moving like that?" Other delegates began to take notice. The humans weren't just surviving in this environment, they were operating with an efficiency that bordered on supernatural. When Private Dayun reached a cliff face that should have been impossible to climb, she scaled it in seconds, finding handholds that the enhanced video feeds could barely detect. The camera followed the squad as they encountered their first challenge. A simulated enemy position built into a crater that would be invisible from most angles. Without apparent communication, the team split into groups and began a coordinated assault that unfolded like a deadly dance. "Are we certain this is training?" asked a Queldorian delegate, his amphibious features creased with concern. "Because what I'm seeing looks like actual combat operations." Yejin checked her notes, suddenly looking less confident than she had moments before. "According to our intelligence reports, this is classified as a routine training exercise by human military standards." The word routine hung in the air like a challenge to everything the delegates thought they understood about humanity. On our screen, Corporal Minsik demonstrated what the humans called environmental adaptation, by using the moon's low gravity and extreme temperature variations to his tactical advantage. He turned the deadly environment itself into a weapon, creating rock slides and pressure explosions that cleared enemy positions with surgical precision. The crystalline Silthara beings stopped their musical chiming entirely. Their mathematical minds were processing what they were seeing, and the calculations weren't adding up to anything they understood about biological limitations. The radiation exposure alone should have killed them within minutes, one of them finally chimed. Yet, they'd been operating in these conditions for how long? According to the timestamp, Hyejin read, her voice beginning to sound strained. This exercise has been running for 6 hours. 6 hours. In conditions that would kill most council species in less than 10 minutes. The mood in the chamber began to shift as more details became apparent. These weren't clumsy training exercises. They were humans voluntarily placing themselves in the most hostile environment they could find and treating it like a normal Tuesday afternoon. The precision of their movements, the seamless coordination between team members, the way they adapted to and overcame obstacles that should have been insurmountable, none of it matched the bumbling, chaotic species they'd been laughing about. Lieutenant Yu Jin appeared on camera, establishing a communications relay in the middle of a radiation storm that was fluctuating wildly enough to interfere with the surveillance equipment itself. She worked with her bare hands in conditions that would require most species to use remote-operated machinery from a safe distance. "This can't be right," muttered the Vorthan energy being, his containment suit sparking with agitation. Our analysis of human capabilities suggested they were barely above primitive in their development. But the evidence was playing out in front of them in high definition. These humans weren't primitive, they weren't clumsy, they weren't incompetent, they were something else entirely. And suddenly, their rapid expansion across the galaxy didn't look like luck anymore. The silence in the chamber had become deafening. What started as entertainment was rapidly becoming something that made even the most battle-hardened delegates uncomfortable. The footage continued to roll, and with each passing moment, the truth became more undeniable and more terrifying. Lieutenant Jun Seo appeared on screen next, working calmly inside what the atmospheric readings showed as a pressure zone that would literally crush most of the species sitting in the chamber. The Queldorian delegates, whose bodies were designed for dense liquid environments, watched in growing horror as Jun Seo performed delicate equipment maintenance in conditions that would turn their amphibious forms into paste. "That pressure reading," whispered a Queldorian scientist, his voice barely audible through the translation system. "It's showing 47 times standard atmosphere. Nothing biological should be able to function in that environment." Yet Jun Seo worked. With steady hands, his movements precise and unhurried. He wasn't struggling against the crushing pressure. He was working with it, using the extreme conditions to test equipment that would apparently need to function in even worse environments later. The camera shifted to Corporal Yu Jin, who was maintaining some kind of communications array in a gravitational field so intense that it was visibly bending light around her position. The ethereal conclave, beings of pure energy who understood gravity better than most, flickered with what could only be described as panic. "Impossible," their collective voice resonated through the chamber. "That gravitational distortion would scatter our consciousness across 3 star systems. How is she maintaining molecular cohesion?" But Yu Jin wasn't just maintaining cohesion, she was performing complex technical repairs that required microscopic precision. Her tools should have been crushed or flung away by the gravitational forces, yet she worked as if she were in a comfortable workshop back on Earth. Then the tactical displays activated, and everything the Council thought they knew about human military capabilities crumbled. The screen showed the results of what humans apparently called Fleet Exercise Bravo 7. Ships with those ridiculous names they'd been laughing about appeared on the display. Eternal Friendship led a formation that included Sorry We're Late, Diplomatic Oversight, and Oops, Wrong Button. The Korthak military delegate felt his blood run cold as he watched Eternal Friendship systematically dismantle 3 autonomous defense networks that his own species had classified as theoretically unbeatable. These weren't lucky shots or random victories. This was surgical precision applied to warfare. "Those defense networks," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "My species spent 200 years developing them. They were designed to be impossible to defeat through conventional means." On-screen Eternal Friendship treated them like training targets, exploiting weaknesses that shouldn't have existed and using tactics that violated everything the Korthak understood about space combat. The ship moved with an elegance that seemed to mock the laws of physics, turning the vacuum of space into a 3-dimensional battlefield where humans held every advantage. But it was the smaller details that truly shattered the delegates' understanding. Specialist Boram appeared in a maintenance bay, and the delegates watched something that shouldn't have been possible. She was talking to the machines she was repairing, actually having conversations with them, and the machines were responding. "The diagnostic systems are showing emotional patterns," reported a Silthara mathematician, his crystalline form vibrating with confusion. "The artificial intelligences are exhibiting preferences, developing personalities, forming what can only be described as friendships with their human operators." This wasn't the primitive behavior they'd been mocking. This was humans creating bonds with technology that transcended simple user interfaces. Boram's emotional attachment translated into repair capabilities that exceeded anything in the galactic databases. She didn't just fix machines, she understood them in ways that made her more effective than entire engineering departments. The camera pulled back to show the bigger picture, and Major In Young's tactical command center came into view. The displays around her showed coordination between human units that defied mathematical modeling. Squads separated by light years were operating with precision that suggested instantaneous communication, yet the quantum entanglement detectors showed no such technology in use. "How are they coordinating like that?" demanded a Vorthan tactical analyst. "Our computers can't even track their decision-making patterns. It's like they're sharing a collective consciousness, but they're clearly individual beings." The answer came when the audio feeds activated. The human units were maintaining constant communication, but it wasn't the formal military protocol that most species used. They were talking about everything: their families, their meals, their hopes, their fears, their dreams. They turned warfare into a social activity, and somehow that made them devastatingly effective. A Hive Queen mathematician frantically worked at her calculations. "The efficiency ratings are impossible," she announced, her mechanical voice trembling. "Individual human units are achieving coordination scores that exceed our collective intelligence models. They're operating as if each soldier contains the tactical awareness of an entire battle fleet. The most disturbing revelation came when the training parameters were displayed on screen. The delegates had assumed they were watching humans being pushed to their limits in these extreme conditions. Instead, the tactical readout showed something that made seasoned military commanders question everything they thought they knew about warfare. These weren't humans being pushed to their limits. These were humans warming up. The environmental conditions, the impossible pressures, the lethal radiation, the crushing gravity. All of it was classified as baseline training parameters. The humans weren't struggling to survive in these conditions. They were using them as a starting point to prepare for something worse. "What?" asked the Drakmor ambassador, his scaled hands shaking as he spoke. "What exactly are they preparing?" "To fight." The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Because if these conditions were just practice, if this level of capability was considered routine, then humanity's rapid expansion across the galaxy suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't luck, it wasn't aggression. It wasn't even ambition. It was competence so far beyond current galactic standards that other species hadn't even recognized it as competence. They had been measuring humans by their own limitations, and humans apparently didn't have any. The massive chamber had fallen into a silence so complete that the ambient hum of the station's life support systems seemed deafening. Nearly 1,000 of the galaxy's most advanced species sat motionless, staring at the holographic display that had just shattered their understanding of reality. The final segment of footage showed Captain Dongmin's squad completing what the Council's own military advisors had mathematically proven to be impossible objectives. They moved through a simulation that combined every deadly scenario the galaxy's finest tactical minds could devise. Radiation storms that would liquefy most organic matter, gravitational anomalies that could tear apart starships, and combat. Situations that required simultaneous mastery of 17 different advanced technologies. But what broke the delegates' minds wasn't the impossible mission itself. It was the audio feed. "Hey Minjun, are we still on for barbecue this weekend?" Captain Dongmin's voice came through clearly as he single-handedly disabled a defense system that had taken the Korthak Empire 3 centuries to develop. "Absolutely," replied Sergeant Minjun while somehow calculating trajectory adjustments that would have challenged a supercomputer. "My wife is making that spicy sauce you like. Should I invite the new guy from engineering?" "Definitely," chimed in Private Jae-sung, who was casually repairing critical equipment in an environment that should have killed him instantly. "He seems lonely since the transfer. Plus, he makes those amazing dumplings." They were discussing weekend social plans while accomplishing feats that violated the known laws of physics and military strategy. The casual nature of their conversation suggested this level of impossible competence was so routine for them that it barely registered as noteworthy. The Korthak military delegate, whose species had built their entire civilization around martial prowess, slowly stood up. His massive reptilian frame seemed to have shrunk somehow, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of its previous confidence. "Formally withdraw the Korthak Empire's support for Resolution 2847B, he announced, his words echoing in the silent chamber. "These beings are not chaotic or incompetent. They are—" He paused, struggling to find words that could convey what he'd witnessed. "They are operating on a level we cannot comprehend." The Hive Queen's mathematical processing centers had been working frantically throughout the presentation, trying to make sense of the data. Suddenly, her mechanical voice cut through the silence with an announcement that chilled every delegate present. "Computational error, systems failure, mathematical frameworks insufficient for analysis." Her thousands of drone assistants buzzed, in confusion, as their collective intelligence encountered something it simply could not process. Human capability parameters exceed maximum theoretical values. Recalculation impossible with current understanding of physical laws. One by one, delegates began to understand what they had actually been witnessing. The humans' rapid expansion across the galaxy, their seemingly random successes, their ability to solve problems that stymied entire civilizations. None of it was luck or chance. It was standard operating procedure for a species that treated the impossible as merely inconvenient. The amphibious Queldorian delegate raised a tentacle with visible trembling. "If these are their training exercises," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what do their actual military operations look like?" The question sparked a wave of horrified realization throughout the chamber. If humans casually performed impossible feats during practice sessions while discussing dinner plans, what were they capable of when they actually focused their attention on a problem? Ambassador Haye Jin, who had started this session confident in humanity's need for containment, now looked pale and shaken. Her hands trembled as she consulted her notes, trying to salvage some semblance of the original plan. "Perhaps," she said, "weakly, we could consider a modified version of the resolution. Some form of monitoring?" "No." The word came from the ethereal conclave, their energy forms flickering with colors that suggested deep concern. "We propose an alternative resolution." The chamber's attention focused on the beings of pure energy who rarely spoke during council sessions. When they did contribute, it was usually to share insights that other species couldn't comprehend. "Resolution 2847C, they announced. "Formal recognition of humanity as a protected development species." The phrase protected development species sent murmurs through the chamber. This classification was reserved for civilizations deemed too valuable to risk losing to interference or conflict. It wasn't about protecting the galaxy from humans. It was about protecting humans from everyone else. Furthermore, the ethereal conclave continued, "We recommend immediate establishment of diplomatic protocols to ensure positive relations with this species. Analysis indicates that having humans as allies would be advantageous." The understatement of the millennium, several delegates thought privately. The vote that followed was unlike anything in council history. What had started as a proposal to quarantine an apparently chaotic species became a unanimous decision to protect and court favor with beings whose casual competence exceeded galactic civilizations' theoretical maximums. Resolution 2847C passed without a single dissenting vote. Dozens of species that had entered the chamber planning to restrict humanity were now desperately trying to figure out how to establish favorable diplomatic relations. As delegates began filing out of the chamber, their conversations filled with urgent planning for diplomatic missions and alliance proposals, the ethereal conclave transmitted one final observation that would be remembered long after the session ended. "We have spent this day measuring human capabilities by our own limitations." Their collective voice resonated through the chamber's communication systems. "Our analysis suggests that humans recognize no such boundaries. They do not merely exceed our expectations, they operate in conceptual frameworks we have not yet developed." The chamber emptied slowly, delegates lost in thought about implications that kept expanding the more they considered them. The laughter that had filled the space hours earlier seemed like it had happened in a different universe. The Galactic Council had stopped laughing. They had started planning instead.